I entered the living room with Mark, a man I'd been secretly seeing for a few months. John, my husband, sat on the couch engrossed in a TV show. His face lit up with a smile when he saw me, but it quickly faded when he noticed Mark standing beside me. "John, we need to talk," I said, my voice trembling slightly. John turned off the TV and glanced at me, confusion clouding his expression. "This is Mark," I continued, gesturing towards him. "He wants you to share me with him, and we can't say no." John's face drained of color. He didn't respond, just stood up abruptly and walked out of the room without a word. The sound of the toilet flushing followed, echoing in the silence that settled between Mark and me. Mark shrugged nonchalantly, his demeanor betraying no hint of concern. We stood there awkwardly, unsure of what would happen next. Minutes ticked by slowly, each one stretching the tension in the air. I glanced nervously at the closed door, waiting for John to return. What would he say? How would he react? I couldn't fathom the storm brewing in his mind. After what felt like an eternity, footsteps approached. John re-entered the room, his expression unreadable. In his hand, he held something, a small, silver keychain dangling from his fingers, catching the light. "What's that?" I asked hesitantly, my voice barely audible. John remained composed, his gaze steady. "This," he said calmly, "is the key to a new beginning." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning I couldn't quite grasp. Mark shifted uneasily beside me, sensing the gravity of the moment. John continued, his voice steady but tinged with a quiet anger. "You bring another man into our home, into our marriage, and expect me to accept this?" I swallowed hard, feeling a knot of guilt and fear tightening in my chest. "John, You've made your choice," he interrupted sharply, cutting through my feeble attempt at explanation. "Now, you'll both face the consequences." He turned and walked away, leaving Mark and me stunned and apprehensive about what lay ahead. John returned to the room, a small object tightly gripped in his hand. My heart sank as I recognized it, a familiar small box, the one where we kept our wedding rings. He held it out, his expression unreadable, and opened it slowly to reveal its empty interior. "I flushed our wedding rings down the toilet," John stated calmly, his voice steady but laced with restrained emotion. "I guess we won't be needing them anymore." Shock and disbelief washed over me. The weight of his actions hit me like a physical blow. I exchanged a glance with Mark, who stood by awkwardly, unsure of how to react to the escalating situation. John placed the empty box on the table with deliberate care and returned to the couch, his posture relaxed but his eyes burning with an intensity one had never seen before. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of appliances and the faint ticking of a clock. I struggled to find words, to make sense of the turmoil swirling inside me. "John, why?" I began, my voice trembling. "Why?" John cut in sharply, his tone betraying a mix of hurt and righteous anger. "Because you brought another man into our marriage, into our home, and expected everything to remain the same?" His words struck a nerve, a painful reminder of the choices I had made and their consequences. Guilt gnawed at me, mingling with fear of what would come next. Mark shifted uncomfortably, breaking the tense silence. "John, maybe we should—" "No," John interrupted firmly, his gaze fixed on me. "There's no we anymore." I felt the weight of his words like a lead weight on my chest. The reality of his actions, the symbolic flushing away of our marriage, left me reeling. Tears welled up in my eyes, a mixture of remorse and helplessness washing over me. John's expression softened slightly as he glanced at me, a flicker of pain crossing his features before he composed himself again. "This is how it has to be," he said quietly, more to himself than to us. Mark remained silent, his presence a reminder of the rift I had caused. I wanted to reach out, to undo the damage, but John's calm resolve and the emptiness of the ring box were stark reminders of the irreparable breach between us. Hours passed in strained silence, each minute stretching into eternity. Mark eventually excused himself, leaving me alone with John and the echoes of what had transpired. He retreated to our bedroom, shutting the door with a finality that underscored the end of our shared life. Alone in the living room, I sat numbly on the couch, grappling with the devastating consequences of my actions. The weight of John's quiet anger and his deliberate gestures, the flushed rings, the emptied box, pressed down on me like a heavy burden. As night descended outside, casting shadows across the room, I realized with a sinking feeling that John's calm exterior masked a storm of hurt and betrayal. The object in his hand had become a symbol of our shattered trust and the unraveling of everything we had built together. "Why are you doing this?" John's voice cut through the tense air, his tone steady but tinged with hurt. His eyes, usually warm and comforting, now held a glint of anguish as he confronted me. Tears welled up in my eyes as I struggled to find the right words. "I love you, John," I managed to say, my voice choked with emotion. "But I also love Mark. I thought we could make this work together." John shook his head slowly, his disbelief palpable. "You can't have both of us," he said quietly, his words carrying the weight of finality. "You made your choice the moment you brought him into our home." Mark, sensing the tension, stepped forward tentatively. "Maybe we can talk about this," he suggested, his voice calm but uncertain. "We can find a solution that works for everyone." John's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing with resolve. "The only solution I see," he said icily, his tone cutting through the air like a knife, "is for you to leave. Both of you." The stark reality of his words hung in the room, each syllable driving home the depth of his hurt and betrayal. I glanced at Mark, silently pleading for him to say something, to offer a way to bridge the chasm that had opened up between us. Mark hesitated, visibly grappling with the gravity of the situation. "John, please," he started, his voice wavering slightly. "We care about you. We don't want—" "Don't," John interrupted sharply, his gaze flickering between us. "Don't pretend this is about caring." The room fell silent again, the tension thickening with each passing moment. I felt the weight of John's accusation, the guilt of my actions pressing down on me like a heavy burden. How had everything spiraled out of control so quickly? "I never wanted to hurt you," I whispered, my voice barely audible amidst the charged atmosphere. John's expression softened for a fleeting moment, a shadow of the love and warmth we had once shared flickering in his eyes. "But you did," he said quietly, his voice tinged with sorrow. "You've shattered everything we had." I reached out tentatively, wanting to touch him, to erase the pain etched on his face. But he stepped back, his retreat a physical manifestation of the emotional distance that now separated us. Mark shifted uncomfortably, unsure of his place in the unfolding drama. "John, maybe we should give each other some time," he suggested tentatively, his voice tinged with uncertainty. John's gaze hardened, his resolve solidifying. "Time won't change what you've done," he said firmly. "You both need to leave. Now." The finality of his words hung in the air, leaving no room for argument or negotiation. Mark looked at me, silently pleading for guidance, but I had none to give. The reality of our shattered marriage and the consequences of my choices crashed down on me with brutal clarity. With a heavy heart, Mark and I gathered our things in silence, packing away the remnants of a life that had splintered beyond repair. John watched silently, his eyes betraying a mix of pain and resignation. As we walked out of the house, the weight of John's calm anger and the devastation of our broken vows pressed down on me with each step. The night air was cool against my skin, a stark contrast to the heat of emotions that raged within me. Behind us, the door closed with a finality that echoed the end of our shared dreams. I glanced back one last time, catching a glimpse of John standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the hallway. In that moment, I knew that John's calm resolve and quiet anger would haunt me for the rest of my days. The confrontation had ended, but the consequences of my actions had only just begun to unfold. That night, after the confrontation with John, Mark and I left his house in a state of somber disbelief. I stayed with Mark, but despite the physical distance, I couldn't shake the feeling that John wasn't finished with us. His calm demeanor had been unsettlingly composed, too accepting given the gravity of the situation. I knew him well enough to understand that beneath that calm exterior, he was brewing something. Days passed in a haze of uncertainty. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly, haunted by the echoes of John's quiet anger and the shattered pieces of our marriage. Mark tried to reassure me, suggesting we move on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that John had a plan, a strategy to turn the tables on us. Then, one evening, a text message arrived on my phone. It was from John, a simple and chilling message that sent a shiver down my spine. "Come back home. We need to talk." Mark frowned when he saw the message over my shoulder. "You can't seriously be considering this," he said, his voice laced with concern. I hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. "I need to know what he's planning," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark shook his head, his frustration evident. "He's not going to forgive this easily," he warned. It could be a trap, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing uncertainty that plagued me. Against Mark's advice, I made a decision. I needed answers, closure, whatever form it might take. The drive back to our house was nerve-wracking. Every mile felt like a step closer to an unknown fate. When I arrived, the house was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. I let myself in, heart pounding in my chest. John was waiting for me in the living room, sitting on the couch with a bottle of wine placed on the table in front of him. His gaze met mine as I entered, his expression unreadable. "You came," he stated calmly, his voice devoid of the anger I had expected. I nodded, unable to speak. The air between us was thick with unspoken words, the weight of our fractured relationship hanging heavy in the room. John gestured to the couch opposite him, a silent invitation to sit. I hesitated for a moment before lowering myself onto the seat, acutely aware of the space between us. He poured 2 glasses of wine, handing one to me. I took it hesitantly, unsure of his intentions. We sat in silence for a long moment, each sip of wine a tentative gesture towards easing the tension. Finally, John spoke, his voice measured. "I've had time to think," he began, his eyes fixed on mine, "about what happened about us." I swallowed hard, unsure of what to expect. "John, He held up a hand, silencing me. "Listen," he said softly, "I'm not here to rehash the past. What's done is done, but we need to move forward." His words took me by surprise. I had anticipated anger, accusations, but instead, there was a calm resolve in his tone that unsettled me even more. "I've made a decision," John continued, his gaze unwavering. "I want a fresh start." I blinked, processing his words. "A fresh start?" I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. John nodded, his expression serious. "Yes, but there are conditions." My heart raced, anticipation mingling with dread. "Conditions?" He leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching mine. "You and Mark leave town," he said bluntly, "tonight, and you never come back." The demand hit me like a physical blow. "John, No," he interrupted firmly. "This is not negotiable. You brought him into our lives, into our home. Now you both leave, and we'll pretend this never happened." I struggled to find words, to comprehend the magnitude of his ultimatum. "What about us?" I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling. John's gaze softened momentarily, a flicker of sadness crossing his features. "There is no more us," he said quietly. "Not after this." Tears welled up in my eyes, a mixture of regret and sorrow overwhelming me. "John, please." He shook his head, his resolve firm. "It's too late for please," he said gently. "You made your choice. Now, you have to live with the consequences." Silence enveloped us once more, the weight of his words settling over me like a heavy shroud. The wine sat untouched in my hand, the taste bitter against my tongue. Minutes passed in tense stillness before I finally nodded, a silent acceptance of the inevitable. "I'll go," I whispered, my voice breaking. John nodded, his expression unreadable. "Goodbye," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving mine. I stood slowly, the room spinning around me. As I walked out of our house for the last time, I knew that John's calm resolve and his meticulously laid plan had won. The ache in my heart and the weight of my choices followed me into the night, leaving behind a trail of shattered dreams and unanswered questions. John poured 2 glasses of wine, handing one to me with a calm demeanor that belied the storm brewing beneath the surface. His voice, steady and collected, cut through the tension in the room like a knife. "I thought we should talk about what happened," he began, his gaze fixed on mine over the rim of his glass. I took a hesitant sip of the wine, its taste bitter on my tongue as unease settled in the pit of my stomach. "What do you want to talk about?" I asked quietly, unable to meet his gaze. John's smile was fleeting, devoid of warmth. "I just wanted to say goodbye properly," he replied, his voice measured, "and to let you know that I've filed for divorce. You'll be hearing from my lawyer soon." The words hit me like a physical blow, sending a wave of panic coursing through me. "John, please," I pleaded, desperation creeping into my voice. "Let's talk about this. We can find a way to fix things." He shook his head slowly, his expression hardening. "It's too late for that," he said firmly, his eyes unwavering. "You made your choice, and now you have to live with it." Tears welled up in my eyes, a mix of fear, regret, and sorrow threatening to overwhelm me. The reality of what I had done, bringing another man into our marriage, shattering the trust we had built, crashed down on me with unbearable weight. "I didn't mean for this to happen," I whispered, my voice cracking with emotion. "I never wanted to hurt you." John's face softened momentarily, a flicker of pain crossing his features before he composed himself again. "Intentions don't change the outcome," he said quietly, his words echoing in the hollow space between us. Silence settled over us like a heavy shroud, broken only by the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the room. The wine in my glass remained untouched, the gesture of peace it was intended to convey now a bitter reminder of the rift between us. "I loved you," John said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I trusted you with everything." His words pierced through me, a stark reminder of the love and trust one had betrayed. Guilt washed over me in relentless waves, mingling with the fear of what lay ahead. "I know I can't undo what I've done," I said finally, my voice steadier now. "But please, John, don't shut me out like this. We can find a way to move forward." He regarded me silently for a long moment, his gaze searching mine as if weighing his next words carefully. "There's nothing left to salvage," he said at last, his tone resigned. "You've crossed a line that can't be erased." The finality in his voice left me reeling, the truth of his words sinking in with painful clarity. I had shattered our marriage irreparably, and now I was facing the consequences. As the evening wore on, we spoke little, the weight of our unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. When I finally stood to leave, John remained seated, his gaze fixed on the empty glass in his hand. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. John looked up then, his eyes meeting mine with a mix of sadness and resolve. "Goodbye," he said quietly, his voice tinged with a sorrow that mirrored my own. I turned away, the sound of his voice echoing in my ears as I walked out of our home. The night air was cool against my skin, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within me. Behind me, the door closed with a soft click, sealing the end of a chapter one had never imagined would come to such a bitter conclusion. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I drove away, leaving behind the shattered remains of a life I had once cherished. Leaving John's house that evening, a cold sense of foreboding settled over me like a heavy shroud. His unnerving calmness had left an indelible mark, foreshadowing the tumultuous weeks that lay ahead. The following days blurred together in a haze of uncertainty and fear. John wasted no time in initiating divorce proceedings, his actions swift and methodical. The legal documents arrived like a death knell, each page a stark reminder of the shattered life I had wrought upon myself. "He's asking for full custody," my lawyer informed me grimly during our first meeting. "He's citing your affair as grounds for instability." I felt the ground shift beneath me. Full custody. The words echoed in my mind, a nightmare taking shape before my eyes. I had always believed I was a good mother, but now my actions threatened to strip me of everything I held dear. Mark, once a pillar of support, began to withdraw under the weight of our crumbling relationship and the mounting legal pressures. His calls became less frequent, his visits sporadic. The guilt of involving him in my betrayal weighed heavily on my conscience, driving a wedge between us that widened with each passing day. "I can't do this," Mark confessed one evening, his voice strained with emotion. "I thought we could make it work, but everything's falling apart." Tears streamed down my cheeks as I listened, knowing deep down that he was right. Our foundation had been built on deceit and betrayal, a shaky ground that could no longer sustain us. Days turned into weeks as the legal battle intensified. John's lawyers presented evidence of my affair with Mark, painting a damning picture of my character. Witness statements, text messages, photographs, all laid bare for the court to scrutinize. In the courtroom, I sat with a sinking feeling as my life unraveled before the judge's eyes. John, composed and resolute, presented himself as the stable and devoted parent, contrasting sharply with the image of instability painted of me. "He deserves full custody," the judge pronounced finally, her words a hammer blow to my hopes. "Ms. Smith, your actions have shown a disregard for the well-being of your children." I felt numb as the reality sank in. Full custody granted to John. My children, the center of my world, slipping away from me because of choices I could never take back. Outside the courtroom, John approached me with a cold determination in his eyes. "This is what you brought upon yourself," he said quietly, his voice devoid of the anger I expected. "I warned you there would be consequences." Tears welled up in my eyes, a mix of regret and helplessness overwhelming me. "John, please," I pleaded, grasping for words that could undo the damage. But he turned away without another glance, leaving me to confront the wreckage of my life alone. In the weeks that followed, I moved out of our home, stripped of custody rights, and left with supervised visitation hours. Every moment with my children felt like a cruel reminder of what I had lost, their confused gazes haunting me as they struggled to understand why Mommy couldn't be with them all the time. Mark, burdened by guilt and the weight of our fractured relationship, eventually withdrew completely. "I can't do this anymore," he confessed during our final conversation. "I'm sorry, but I need to move on." His departure left me utterly alone, grappling with the consequences of my actions in a world that had turned against me. Friends and family, once pillars of support, distanced themselves, unable to reconcile the person I had become with the person they once knew. As the days stretched into months, I watched from a distance as John rebuilt his life, a life that no longer included me. He moved into a new home, filled with memories I was no longer a part of. Pictures on social media painted a picture of happiness and stability, a stark contrast to the turmoil that consumed my days and nights. His calm anger, the mask of composure he had worn throughout our ordeal, had concealed a ruthless determination to exact his revenge. And he had succeeded. I had lost everything, my marriage, my children, my dignity, all because of a betrayal that had spiraled out of control. In the solitude of my new reality, I began to confront the harsh truth. I had brought this nightmare upon myself. My choices, fueled by selfishness and recklessness, had led me down a path of devastation from which there was no return. As I stared at the empty rooms of my new apartment, haunted by memories of a life that once was, I knew that John's calm resolve had sealed my fate. The nightmare I now lived was the consequence of my betrayal, a punishment I could never escape.